It's Tuesday, February 18th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and join me to do just that as we trudge on through our offseason preview series here. A little mini series, only 2 episodes. Can you really call something a series if it's only 2 episodes? Nobody cares about that. What the people do care about is that the man joining me to talk football today is the one and only Dalton Del Don. Dalton, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, Harmon. I didn't get to talk to you last week. So how was the Super Bowl? Did you have some good food? And I enjoyed your interviews, of course. But tell me about the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl was absolutely electric. I didn't have a single bad meal there. If you don't count, hotel breakfast, that you just need to get something in your gut to get rolling. Super Bowl was awesome. New Orleans is a great Super Bowl city. Enjoyed the hell out of everything there. I definitely have some recommendations if people are traveling to New Orleans at any time, if you want to stop at a couple of the restaurants there. Great time. Everything was awesome, Dalton, except getting out of the city. That was chaotic because of the parades and just general Super Bowl fare that was going on there. So it was great. And yeah, it has been a minute since we've talked.
Yeah, for sure. Too long. That's one nice thing about Vegas. It was insane. You could get a cab ride Monday morning and there was no traffic. Vegas is so perfectly set up for the Super Bowl. It should frankly be there every year. But New Orleans is cool for sure. But I heard that the hotels were just ridiculous. So that was even harder to get than the tickets for the games themselves. But too bad the game ended up in a blowout. But good times, and we're ready to move on to next year.
I certainly will not be voting for Super Bowl in Vegas every year, if only because having to spend a week in Vegas, especially working a week in Vegas, is not all that fun. I probably spent a collective 90 minutes of time outside in the Vegas Super Bowl, which is just not good for the well-being, Dalton, and two wellness bros like ourselves. We can't really stand for that. So anyways, enough of that.
Need sunlight. I'm sitting in my dark room way too much myself. Yeah, need sunlight. Super important for sure,
especially early in the morning. Which when you're going to the gym,
get your eyes up. Yeah,
when you're going to the gym at 6 in the morning, and people are still smoking and drinking as you're walking through the casino to go to the hotel gym, not a good situation. Anyways, enough of that talk. We'll save the wellness talk for the Dalton Harmon Wellness Podcast that we will be debuting on the premium feed later on this summer. That's a joke. But anyways, we are going through here our NFC offseason questions series. We did the AFC questions as we with Scott last week. We're going to move on here to the 16 NFC teams. Also, Dalton mentioned Super Bowl interviews. We have another one for you on the end of this podcast. You guys are going to hear my one-on-one interview with Lions running backs David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Some really good stuff out of that one, so definitely stay tuned for that at the end of this show. But let's waste no more time. Let's get into these NFC teams here, Dalton. We are going to go in the draft order of the NFC teams, so worst to best. So let's start here with the New York Giants, who will have the 3rd pick in the NFL draft. Simple question for them, Dalton, this offseason. What is the plan at quarterback? This is the team that I think has to come out of this offseason with some sort of answer. They brought Joe Shane and Brian Daboll back with a playoff mandate from the owner, essentially. Kind of seemed like he brought those guys back begrudgingly. But a big part of this, if they're going to keep those jobs, is to have a plan at quarterback. And of course, because Malik Neighbors is on this team, we care about who the Giants have at quarterback this year.
Tyrone Tracy Jr. could be a fun fantasy pick. Theo Johnson, an interesting young tight end. But Malik Neighbors could be a top 10 overall pick, could be top 5 overall pick if we got him a quarterback. I don't have a strong opinion of the rookies. They have the 3rd pick. Do you have a strong take on Sanders, Ward? Or do they go free agency? But we don't have an answer to this one, but it is the clear question. How do the Giants address quarterback? And it's so important for fantasy. Tracy Jr. has a top 15 fantasy back upside. And like I said, Neighbors has top 5 overall upside. He was, going to be drafted as a top 10 pick probably this year, even with a shaky quarterback. He was that good as a rookie. But if we can get him a real life one, then wheels up.
Yeah. So first of all, on Tyrone Tracy, I just think it's worth noting this running back class is very, very good. And I've at least been talking with people who would just say hey, I'm not saying Tyrone Tracy he was great as a rookie, but any running back, you got to be a little bit just keep your eyes peeled. Any non-superstar running back, just keep your eyes peeled on maybe some level of competition being added to the running back room in this draft class. Again, Tyron Trace is a hit for them. I don't think they're looking to replace him necessarily. It's one of the things that Joe Schoen has gotten right during his tenure as the Giants general manager. Not a long list, by the way. But I do think that's just something to keep your eye on. But I'm not saying that you need to look. It's just, again, something to keep your eye on. But with the Malik Neighbors part of this specifically, Giants quarterback plan, there's no answer in free agency, right, Dalton, that I think would move Malik Neighbors' ADP, which, like you mentioned, is going to be high anyways. I think, maybe like if they got a Jameis type, obviously that would be exciting from a production standpoint. I joked about that at the end of last season. They're definitely a team that I think could trade for Matthew Stafford, because if you look at this Giants roster, I know they're picking third in the draft, but it's not totally bereft of good options. Like, they have Andrew Thomas if he's back healthy. They made some decent additions on the offensive line last year. They're good on the defensive line if Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns are available. Again, there are obviously Malik Neighbors and Tyron Tracy. There are building blocks to this team. I think that a coach and GM combination on the hot seat could convince themselves, like, yeah, let's flip a high second or maybe 2 day 2 picks to the Rams for Matthew Stafford and give one run at this thing. So that would obviously, I think, that would create probably some level of jump in Malik Neighbors' ADP that I don't think a rookie at the 3rd overall pick would do.
Yeah, Winston would be a fun one for Neighbors, but wow, Stafford. Yeah, now we're really cooking with gas. That it makes sense what you're saying as far as this roster being better than their record would indicate. And quarterback would be the one position that could really, obviously the most important one to upgrade. So I love Neighbors. It sounded like you loved him during your interview as well.
Yeah, he was awesome.
So yeah, let's get him a quarterback. And you're right though. Other than Stafford, free agency is pretty thin. It sounds like Kirk Cousins, and who knows if he has anything left, is being linked to the Browns. So yeah, Stafford is one that I hadn't thought of, and that would be quite interesting. His arm would play well in that weather, no problem.
Yeah, I think Stafford, if a trade goes down, we'll talk about Stafford when obviously we get to the Rams part of things here. So let's just save it for that. But I do think Stafford and Malik Neighbors would be fun. And yeah, just to get this on the record, because I don't know if I've said it on this show, my conversation with Malik Neighbors was, I was really impressed with him. I just thought he came off very thoughtful. He was really well detailed and just his thoughts about the game, especially like how to set up, yards after catch opportunities. I really like, it's not as if you needed more proof that the guy's a great player. You watch him play and you can look at the stats and see he's a great player. But man, just knowing what he puts into the game and kind of the thoughtfulness to playing wide receiver, I really came away impressed with him. So let's hope he gets a quarterback here in the next few months. Let's move on to the next team here, which is the Carolina Panthers. Pressing question for them this offseason is, can we eschew clear defensive needs to get one more pass catcher in here? Dalton, by points allowed, this is the worst defense in NFL history. They certainly need to hammer that side of the ball. But at the same time, I do think one more wide receiver addition could really take this offense from solid to potentially like a top 15 unit in the NFL next season.
Especially now it would look like Bryce Young's career is back on track. Let's get him another receiver. Leggett is still unsure of. Coker, a lot of interesting things, right? 4th highest catch rate over expected among all qualified receivers. You tweeted he was 2nd among rookie wide receivers in yards per route run versus man. He was actually one of only 7 receivers with yards per route run over 4 against man coverage over the final 6 weeks. So very interesting stuff from Coker. But even if he is the real deal, let's add another receiver there for Bryce Young, who is going to be, after his second half last year, people are going to be interested in drafting him because he started running as well too, Bryce Young. So yes, I'm with you here. Thielen, is probably going to move on. Unclear about Leggett. Let's get Coker and another receiver in there. And Jatavian Sanders was quite interesting in the tight end room too there, a young guy there for Dynasty folks. So yeah, I'm with you here. Let's get Bryce Young another wideout.
Yeah, and specifically the type of receivers that these guys are, even if Thielen's back, because Thielen is mostly a big slot receiver at this point in his career. Jalen Coker is a big slot receiver that I think obviously can play outside a little bit. You mentioned the man coverage numbers. That shows up on film too. I kind of gave him like a Jacoby Myers comparison. Somebody who can play all over the formation. But even Leggett, I know they tried him out at X receiver late in the year, did not go very well. He was much better at the beginning of the season when they used him off the line of scrimmage. They put him in motion. Like, he's another guy that you don't want to make a full slot receiver, but you kind of want to use as a flanker and move around and get him some slot receiver reps. You don't want him. The way to make him fail, I think, is to make him a full-time X receiver. So some sort of bigger player, who can win at that X receiver position. I think they're a candidate to take Tet McMillan at the 8th overall pick because he is a classic X. He can get deep. He can win contested passes. That might be too rich if a great defensive prospect falls to them, but not something I would rule out. That's the type of receiver I'd be looking for if I was Carolina.
Yeah, but it's a fair point. They obviously could address the defense as well, but as a fantasy guy and, what Bryce Young showed at the end of last year, it would be definitely worthwhile to address wide receiver position with the first couple rounds of this draft.
Yeah, otherwise they're pretty set on offense because Chuba Hubbard was awesome last year. They do got to do something at center, but otherwise the offensive line is pretty well intact. They will probably add some sort of running back at some point too because Jonathan Brooks likely to miss all of next season, which is a bummer. Let's stick in the NFC South and go to the next team here. New Orleans Saints. Question for them: is the Derek Carr era over? And what comes next if that is the case? Kellen Moore had some kind things to say about Derek Carr in his opening presser, but really stopped short of committing to him as the QB1 for 2025, which I think makes sense. I also think Carr is a trade candidate. So Dalton, Kellen Moore is in the middle of filling out his offensive staff, which of course he's the final head coach to be hired. He's going to be the last one to fill out his staff. That makes sense. He is, again, not committed to Derek Carr as the quarterback here. There's some interesting skill position players on the New Orleans Saints roster, but is this a situation where I don't know. I don't know what they would do at quarterback if they moved on from Carr, but I think that is probably the right decision for their franchise's future.
Yeah, Moore's an interesting hire for fantasy terms. His offensive ranked basically top 8 in plays per game the last 6 years. He's been coordinator, top 10 in neutral pace. Obviously, he's had some good offenses, but it's the type of stuff that we like to hear, usually more motion. We know that from New Orleans. We were promised that the first 2 weeks last year as well. But what is Carr's contract situation? Can they get out of it? I mean, it just feels like it's lather, rinse, repeat with New Orleans. Same thing. He looks good a couple games, then he gets injured, and now they're just stuck in this quarterback purgatory, it feels like, in New Orleans. But do they have any other outs? And we talked about how thin the free agency is. So I kind of just expect them to run it back and more of the same with Derek Carr.
I kind of think that might end up being what it is. I just wonder if some team is willing to trade for him, like a team like the Tennessee Titans, because he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. Like, he is one of the best 25 quarterbacks in the league. And if you have if you're a team that, Kellen Moore, I think, is going to have a lot of job security here. I think they understand what the deal is here in New Orleans, that it's time to start flipping towards a new era. I think the Marshawn Lattimore trade at the end of this trade deadline last year was sort of a signal to that. I don't know that we're going to see some of the same wild restructures and kicking the can down the road and trading up in the draft and all that stuff, although Mickey Loomis is still the GM, so that could age poorly, what I just said. However, I do think that some team like the Titans that has more, we need to prove something if we're the coaching staff there with Brian Callahan. Do we trade for Derek Carr? There's some familiarity there. Could the Jets trade for Derek Carr if they're just looking to establish something early on? I think he could fetch you something which would help you get out of the contract. I don't think he will be outright cut because that would be prohibitive from a salary cap standpoint.
Yeah, I think we're going to get more of the same, but definitely some. That's a good point about Moore giving a long leash. I think they realize that they're in a bad situation with the cap and the quarterback. So let's give him a few years to rebuild this.
And I'll just say, I really like where Chris Olave could be deployed in this Saints offense. Kellen Moore moved Devontae. He does this a lot, like particular type of wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb was a high volume slot receiver in his offense. Obviously, Keenan Allen, high volume slot receiver in his offense. Devontae Smith, he kicked in to be like a 50+% slot player, especially with all the motion. I think there's going to be more motion in this offense now that it's not Jalen Hurts at quarterback, because Hurts is a particular type of passer that leaving it static is probably best for him. But I think we could see a lot of motion here that could lead to a lot of favorable alignments for a guy like Chris Olave. Of course, the problem is just quarterback and concussions, but I'm not totally red Xing the Saints in terms of a team that I'm willing to draft into. I just need to know who's going to be throwing passes here.
I mean, healthy Olave, a healthy Shaheed, theoretically has some upside there, but then you got an aging Kamara and some downside as well.
All right, next team up here is the Chicago Bears. Question for them: does Ben Johnson begin with an offensive line overhaul here in Chicago? There's probably some pieces that can work here for Chicago. Darnell Wright's been a fine right tackle for them. But I think they're pretty set at the let me put it this way. I think they're set at the pass catcher positions. They're obviously set at quarterback. I think something could happen in the backfield just because of the Ben Johnson, DeAndre Swift familiarity in a bad way. But other than that, I think offensive line is probably what this team's going to hammer in the offseason.
Yeah, it totally makes sense aside from the DeAndre Swift, Ben Johnson relationship you just mentioned. But how bad is their offensive line, Harmon? Most of the grading systems had them as relatively average last year. They created the fourth highest time to pressure. Caleb was the second worst pressure to sack rating. He led all QBs in sacks, fourth most sacks of all time with a game left to play. I don't know what he finished with. This is dated back to college. He held the ball so long. I mean, quarterback is a sack stat mostly. So I don't know. I think Caleb Williams hopefully can improve with the coaching. I'm more optimistic of that than I am any offensive line going to fix his issues. But maybe I'm wrong there. I don't know. Caleb Williams has many questions coming out of his rookie season, and I think he has many things to work on his game.
Well, I think Darnell Wright, good enough right tackle. You can start with him there. Braxton Jones, left tackle, he can play. Probably if they find the right left tackle, they could maybe kick him into guard. The thing is, regardless of what you think about the interior, Matt Pryor's a free agent. He was their right guard who played 88.6% of the snaps. Coleman Shelton was their center. Wasn't a very good center, but he played almost 99% of the snaps. He's a free agent. Tevin Jenkins, left guard, 65% of snaps. Pretty good player, but has injury issues. He's a free agent. So even if the line was better than some of the sack numbers, they still have guys that are up for free agency. And I just imagine that Ben Johnson's going to want to replicate a lot of what we saw in Detroit, where they made consistent investments in that interior and really all over the offensive line. So that's kind of my thing here. Is I think they want to take that unit from maybe below average, not the worst line in the league, but maybe below average, to a real strength, because I think that will allow them to get done all the other things that they want to do across the board.
Yeah, they don't need a wide receiver, or their defense is solid. So yeah, it's an area of need, especially with you bringing up the contractual issues. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, again, I think it's good news for all the guys there who are already established players. Let's move to your team here, San Francisco 49ers. I'm open to any big question you have here. Mine was, again, just another offensive line question. I think it's time for an offensive line retooling in San Francisco. But other than that, it's mostly just about who's going to be available early on in the season for them.
Yeah, things like following Ayuk's recovery, McCaffrey's health, and where will Deebo Samuel land. But I mean, I think he's pretty much as good as gone. The Purdy contract situation. But as far as team needs, 100%, you got it right. It's the line on both sides. They may go defensive in the first round too, but definitely offense. Dahlman, they should sign at center. There's a connection there with Shanahan. His offenses were at best when he had the center in Atlanta. And then he brought one over, and since he retired, I forgot the Niners guy. They've been missing a center big time in this offense. Yeah, there are plenty of questions across the whole line outside of Trent Williams. So I'm fully with you here. And Shanahan's been trying to get away with, kind of Band-Aids there. And it's caught up to them. And I think that it's going to be a point of emphasis is the Niners addressing the O-line. And
they got to think about Trent Williams' succession plan too. Maybe a guy that they could start at right tackle, maybe move to left tackle in time. Yeah, I think that has to be a focus for the offense. Obviously, they're going to work on the Brock Purdy extension. I'm sure that just happens at some point. By the way, you mentioned Deebo Samuel. I've thought a lot about this. I have a Deebo Samuel team, but it's going to come up later in the podcast, so I'll save it. But I do have a team that I think makes sense to actually just straight up trade for Deebo and prevent him from getting to the open market. So I'll save it for that. But yeah, you're right. The big one is Ayuk's injury timeline here, because I think their three wide receiver set of Ayuk at X, Jennings at flanker, and Pearsall as the slot, and those two guys kind of rotating. That's a really good three receiver set. It just depends on when is Ayuk going to be close to 100%.
And Kittle and McCaffrey too. So people worrying about their receiving options. I'm like, I maybe Pearsall was drafted too high or whatever, but he showed flashes, and
he was good towards the end of last year.
Yeah. And Ayuk, how quickly he's going to recover. But yeah, if he does, I think they're fine depth wise. Deebo wasn't even a receiver this last year anyway. I mean, he's not running the routes. He can't beat man coverage. I mean, I'd love to get any draft pick for him at this point. I love Deebo, by the way, man. Yeah. I put his heart and soul out there. Plays so tough, plays through injuries. Will always love Deebo. But as far as receiving core, I think their depth is fine after addressing it. Writing was on the wall when they drafted Pearsall last year in the first round. Too bad Cowing didn't show much at all whatsoever. But you throw in Kittle and McCaffrey, I think Purdy's going to have plenty of options to throw the football to.
Yeah, but even doubling up at receiver, taking Cowing, who maybe they just thought was a return specialist, but even that it was a signal that I think they knew that 2020, and I mean, Debo has been, there's like trade rumors with Debo every year now. I think this is the year he's actually not on the roster in 25. And I think that 3 receiver set, once Ayuk is healthy, and I don't want to just yada his injury. It was a serious one, but even if he's not back fully functional until the back half of the season, I still think the 2 receiver set of Jennings and Pearsall is more than good enough. Let's move to the next team here. A team that often, back when these two teams were good, played the San Francisco 49ers in the playoffs. That's the Dallas Cowboys here. My question is, after a few meat and potatoes drafts, do they prioritize more sizzle for the steak this offseason? What I mean by that, Dalton, and producer Colin and I have talked about this previously, that the last few years they've taken linemen, they've taken Mozzie Smith, which is a hit or miss, but they've just had these kind of boring drafts of late. We know they don't pay big bucks to outside free agents. They prioritize signing their players at the last minute so they can squeeze every bit of free marketing out of NFL media circles as possible. That's their main focus, is how can they drag this Micah Parsons thing out so people are talking about them all offseason. But for the real moves, I kind of think this is the time for them to maybe add some playmakers to this team. A wide receiver 2, a running back 1, or a running back 2 if they bring back Rico Dowdle. So I think there's a lot of potential for there's a lot of potential for a fantasy factor to be taken by the Dallas Cowboys and added at some point this offseason.
Oh, yeah. Give me all the Jeanty, please, as a fantasy guy. I mean, he could be pushed up into the first round of fantasy drafts if the Cowboys take him. I mean, one of the best prospects in a while. In this system, so you're shaking your head. It's probably more of a bad move by the Dallas Cowboys, but great move for fantasy players.
Couldn't care less about the bad move or not for the Dallas Cowboys. Honestly, that doesn't move the needle at all for me. In fact, if producer Colin's sad about the Cowboys, better for me, better content on my end. But I don't care about that. We have to make sure we got to do everything that we can to get Ashton Jeanty to Denver. We got to get these teams to own the top 20 picks, overthink it, running back value, yada, yada, because that's the ecosystem that I think is ready to take off with a top back. That's my agenda this offseason, not getting him taken by the damn Cowboys.
Yeah, 1 million catches, and that we all wanted him in that Peyton system, the running back, and it flopped last year. So if that's fair, yes, you get Jeanty as the main back in that offense. Totally cool too. But yeah, no, Cowboys with a healthy Dak indoors. Come on, there'll be a monster there too. Jeanty seems like a real special prospect. So I'm good if he ends up in a spot that he's going to be the main guy. That's all I care most about. And Dallas is certainly that situation. But sure, if they could add a second wideout here. They've been bereft of that number 2 wideout they're in bad need of one for couple years now. So CeeDee Lamb can't see all the targets. So sure, that's another option. But yeah, I'm hoping Jeanty.
Yeah, Cowboys aren't exactly flush with cap resources, although they'll probably just restructure or kick the can down the road with Dak's contract and get some room there. But it's not like there's a free agent that I think really, really fits them necessarily. And again, they're not going to pay big money for somebody. But at that 12th overall pick, I don't think Ted McMillan's going to make it there, but maybe they're a Luther Burden team. There's some other like playmaker that pops up there. Even a tight end. Like I think Ferguson is a solid player, but if you can get one of those really good tight ends, I think that also wouldn't be such a bad idea either.
Yeah, Warren seems to go right around there. Yeah, right after if the Niners don't take him. Those interesting options, and the Cowboys probably will make a splash with the big like skill position player though. It feels like a Jerry Jones thing.
All right, let's go to the next team here. NFC South, Atlanta Falcons. This one was tough to come up with a question that we would know in the offseason because I think this team is largely set personnel-wise on offense outside of Kyle Pitts possibly being a trade candidate. Most of their needs are on defense. They got to hammer that side of the ball. So really, to me, it's just, is Michael Penix ready to take off? Because Dalton, if he is, not like Drake London, 4th in the NFL in receiving yards, needed any help. He needed any more, goodness to be great. But quarterback would be awesome there, obviously making the offense better for a guy like Bijan Robinson. Certainly, I'm ready to track a lot of the Michael Penix reports in the offseason.
For sure. Just for fantasy terms with London, like it's not just the accuracy with Penix, and obviously Cousins was looking a little shot, but just looking at how Penix performs, like he avoids sacks, he doesn't scramble, his ADOT was super high. Like these are like perfect for a fantasy wide. Just getting all these targets downfield and no lost plays in between. Like, I mean, it really looks like a good setup. And boy, he can he stay healthy? Did he suffer a season-ending injury every year in college, basically?
There's that photo of him with like both his knees in a cast and a wheelchair because he tore both of his ACLs. Michael Penix from college.
Yeah, no, I'm rooting for him though, and he looked awesome down the stretch, and let's hope he can stay healthy. And Drake London could be, absolutely finishes a top three. There's so many guys you could say top 3 fantasy wideout, but he's one of them legitimately next year.
Absolutely, he'll be a second round target for me, no question. Once again this year. Yeah, the only personnel change that might happen here is Kyle Pitts. I do think he's a guy that could get traded in the offseason. It's probably time. It's probably time for these two teams these two parties to go their separate ways. Similar sort of vein here for our next team, Arizona Cardinals. They're another team that I think is heading into a defensive heavy offseason. So really the only question for them that I have is there another step to take in the Kyler Murray Drew Petzing partnership? We won't know this, I think, until the games start, Dalton, but I don't know. I've really soured on I haven't soured on Murray. I just think we know who he is, and I think we kind of know what the Petzing offense is, and I'm a little concerned that we won't see any personnel changes here from a skill position standpoint because they don't really need them. They have the guys, I think, to be a good offense, and it's just kind of, are we going to get the same sort of very volatile product that we got last year? So I don't know. Is there anything you're looking for in the offseason that might tell a different story for these Cardinals?
Yeah, I don't know if this is. I'll just kind of take it to Marvin Harrison Jr. route here. Can we get any statement from the coaches that we're going to use him differently this year? We messed up his usage as a rookie because it was kind of criminal. Ranked 48th in target rate, led the league in go routes. More than a quarter of his routes were go routes. One of the most effective receivers of the league when targeted over the middle, but he saw the second highest rate of targets in the league on the perimeter, 75% of his targets. So that's what I'm concerned with here is, are we going to see deployment differently of Marvin Harrison Jr.? You would know about this better than me, but would you agree that was just weird how they used him? They had him running as a decoy for most of the season. And when they actually used him in crossers a couple times, he was successful. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on MHJ's disappointing rookie campaign?
Yeah, and this is sort of what I mean by, is there another step for either Murray or Drew Petzing? Because I think that would obviously help with the Marvin Harrison stuff. Because, when you look at how he was used in college, he was an outside X receiver, but he was used on a lot more in-breaking routes than he was as a rookie. From a reception perception standpoint, 2 of his 3 routes that were above the prospect average were slants and digs. And you could probably count on one hand how many slant routes he ran and got the ball thrown to him on last season with the Arizona Cardinals. That was a huge problem. Just quick in-breaking routes weren't really a part of it. And I think I put it this way with Harrison. I think that the coaching staff needs to kind of come to terms with the player that he is, not the player that he looks like, because he does look like a big hulking X receiver, but I think he's better deployed off, and not he's going to mostly take snaps at X, but look at what the Bengals do with Jahmyr Chase. And Chase is much more of a freak show than Marvin Harrison is from just a physical standpoint, from a speed standpoint, sure, but they give him so many layup catches. Look at what the Cowboys do with CeeDee Lamb. Nobody really deploys their true number 1 wideout as an 80, except the Houston Texans with Nico Collins, by the way, but just as an 80% X receiver on all their snaps. The Cardinals did that last year. I don't think they can do that again this year, but I also doubt, Dalton, that we're going to get some, missive from the Jonathan Gannon and the Cardinals, we will definitely be using Marvin Harrison Jr. more in the slot and off the line next year. So that's kind of a tough one to figure out in the offseason.
Totally. And Trey McBride's such a big part of that passing offense. They may not have a wide receiver 2 there for competitive targets, but he's a big one there. But that's a fair point. And you are right, to be clear. I'm not just making excuses for Harrison Jr. He has his limitations, and it's clear that he was maybe a little bit overhyped, but no one would think twice. You'd rather Malik Neighbors on your team, obviously. Brian Thomas Jr. on your team, obviously. Yep. I'm sorry. I said that to you mid last year, but I'm claiming victory on that one.
You're
Brian
100%
Thomas Jr.
right.
over Marvin. No question. That was screaming to me on the tape. I thought just clear there. But anyway, he's a much better player than the fantasy guys are upset with him last year. He could be used differently moving forward, but at the same time, he's not quite the prospect that we had hoped for.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's ways where you can work around some of his weaknesses. And to be clear, I think the biggest weakness for him was catching the ball in traffic and working contested situations. And I think he got slightly better at that in the last 3 to 4 games of the season. So that's like a skill that he can learn and develop in. The overall explosive nature of his play, that's going to be something that's more of like an outstanding question. But again, I think that's a tough one. Like, we're not going to have answers to this in the offseason. Okay, let's take our first break. When we come back, we will talk through all these other NFC teams right after this. All right, we're back. We've got another NFC West team, Dalton, to start us off here as we continue on through this conference and the offseason questions. For the Seattle Seahawks, how much pass volume are we going to see sliced off this team post Clint Kubiak hire? That does seem to be the consensus opinion from the fantasy hive mind, is that, Clint Kubiak's coming in here. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot less than they were last year in Seattle. And I think I probably 60% agree with that. Clint Kubiak was effusive in his praise for Kenneth Walker in his opening presser. That might be some signal there. Worth noting, when we're looking at this pass disparity, Seattle was 9th in neutral pass rate last year. New Orleans, who Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for last season, was 25th.
The other question here before we get to the running back was DK Metcalf's. I guess they have an out there, and there's a bit of rumors that he may be on the trade block. But then at the same time, I heard the new offensive coordinator, the number one thing that they wanted to know was, how are you going to deploy Metcalf? Because they felt that he was totally misused last year. He was definitely used differently in the red zone, and JSN emerged as their clear number one there. So a lot of questions with Seattle's new system there. What are your thoughts on Kenneth Walker versus Charbonnet? Walker really impressed at times last year, K9. And Charbonnet, I don't believe, has ever received double-digit touches in a game that Walker was healthy. So I still think he's going to be the guy there, and it sounds like the offseason chatter is hyping him up. But we heard a bit of that last year as well. Yeah,
I think Walker's the best back on the team, and I actually do think that an under center rushing attack is going to be good for him specifically. Like, one thing I noted a lot in the in last season was that Geno is not like, he can definitely go under center and deep shots off play action. I think he's a good fit for this system, but he was really being used a lot as like a shotgun passer under Ryan Grubb's offense. And Kenneth Walker is not a shotgun rusher. He's better under center. So I think this scheme fit is good for him. He just needs to stay healthy. That's really the only thing. And they need to get better on the interior offensive line. Like, their right guard, center, left guard, terrible combination last year. They've got to. What I hope they don't do is just say, okay, we made a coordinator change, that will fix the offensive line. No, they got to get some more talented pieces in there. And to your point on DK Metcalf, I've thought a lot about this, man. Because DK, kind of similar to what we're talking about with Marvin Harrison, he looks like a big X receiver. You're probably going to play him at X receiver a bunch, but he's also not a guy, like he very different than Harrison in that he is a physical specimen of a player, but he doesn't play like a physical brand of football. He doesn't, he's not like a great contested catch receiver, back shoulder player. You actually want to get him running on like crossers and in breakers and things like that as well. And I think of this offense with Clint Kubiak and, kind of running just if they just play the Shanahan hits, I think he could do sort of a poor man's Nico Collins impression in this offense where they're getting him on these big in breakers, and that would be a good fit for him as that player. So as we're talking about all of this, let's say DK Metcalf stays on the team, because I'm with you. I do think there's some signal there, how Mike McDonald talked about DK Metcalf and sort of saying there was some meat left on the bone with him. They're going to run the football more. Does that give you any hesitancy with JSN, who right now is the consensus wide receiver 13 in Fantasy Pros ranking right now?
Yeah, you don't love with a new situation, new play calling and all that. You ideally like it the same with how awesome it was for JSN last year, because that was ideal circumstances. Lockett may move on, but he might as well have been anyway last year. So Metcalf really did take a back seat to JSN. So yes, you have to have a little concern there. That said, after the top 10 wide receivers on my board, it's kind of like a big tier. Like I have him next, but it's Tyreek Hill, Ladd McConkey, McLaurin, Mike Evans, Higgins, Zay Flowers. I mean, it's kind of a big tier there that I don't see any jump outs. So I'm kind of have JSN at the top of that tier there. And boy, I have a top 10 that's pretty strong. And by the way, Drake London's right is in that top 10. Interesting you said that about Nico Collins. Do you think he could be put up bigger stat line if he were used differently and not at an X 80% of the time?
Yeah, Nico. I mean,
yeah. Or does it suit him pretty well?
Yeah,
okay, it's already pretty big enough. Yeah, his
right.
stat line's pretty good enough. I get it, but I didn't realize he was used quite that extreme as others.
Yeah, I mean, it went down a little bit in these last 2 years than it was early in his career, which, I mean, that was like going from bottom level offensive coordinating to, sort of around the mid pack with Bobby Slowick. Maybe Nick Caley comes in here, depending on who they add at the wide receiver position, because if they could get somebody who could take some of those X receiver reps, I do think Nico could be moved around the formation. Like, yeah, you get him in the slot against a smaller cornerback, he's going to destroy those guys too. So yeah, I think there's actually some more upside for Nico to get out of his game if he moves around the formation a little bit more. But yeah, with JSN specifically, I think if they went away from him at all, it would just be bad coaching, and I don't think Clint Kubiak is an idiot. So I imagine he's going to lead this team in targets. I'm not too concerned about it.
Fair, yeah. What a year he had last year. What resurrected his career, man. He looks went from a bust to now we're arguing if he's 11th receiver the next year. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, let's not argue if a guy like has a reasonably productive rookie season and he's a bust after year one. That was there were some tough JSN takes from the fantasy bros this offseason. Okay, last offseason, excuse me. Okay, let's go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here, and let's stick on slot receivers. Can the Buccaneers retain Chris Godwin is the offseason question for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've thought a lot about this situation because I'm actually working on Chris Godwin's reception perception right now. I'm just going to read this quote. It's a long one, so stick with me. From new Bucs offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard, who was promoted from within to take over the job from Liam Cohen. Talking about Chris Godwin, he says, "I love Chris, and you guys know Chris is as good of a human being and football player as you're going to be around. He was a huge asset to us last year, being a coach on the field and playing all those different roles. He understands what we're trying to get out of the concepts, the splits, the motion. When he's blocking on this concept, who's running the route off this concept, and he was so able to translate that by being in so many different offenses and do it at a high level because of the preparation he put into it." And Grizzard goes on to say it's not his decision. Obviously, it's up to Jason Light and Todd Bowles how to get the contract done and retain Godwin. I don't know, man. After watching Chris Godwin recently and hearing these words from a guy who was promoted within to keep up what was an electric offense last year, I think Chris Godwin's back with this team. If I had to make a prediction, I think he's back with this team because of what he mentioned here, that he's just a huge asset to getting the kind of order of operations with how this offense rolls and all the splits and alignments and motions and things like that. He's so critical to it. I would be trying to bring Chris Godwin back. I think the Bucs will try to do everything in their power to bring Chris Godwin back. But Dalton, to say the other side of it, there's a lot of teams that could use a Chris Godwin type. And now that T. Higgins is going to get the franchise tag, he probably is the top available free agent wide receiver.
It does sound like Tampa Bay will do everything it takes to re-sign him. Godwin was clearly playing injured through 2023, and they finally started using him in the slot again last year, and he exploded, looked awesome. Fantasy ramifications big time here. It would help Mayfield after losing Liam Cohen to bring back Godwin, of course. But, for fantasy managers who were after Mike Evans, free up some targets, and Jalen McMillan, who was a monster down the stretch too. But for the Bucs organization, for Baker Mayfield, it makes all the sense of the world to bring back Godwin. And he was fantastic before going down last year.
Yeah, and I think there's a piece missing if he's not in there because of what he does in the run game, but also all of the kind of preparation parts of it, beyond the fact that he's just a great receiver. And I think Jalen McMillan's a good player, but I think he's a wide receiver 3. And I think Godwin is closer to a number 1 receiver than he is like a true number 2. So I think him and Evans that's a great duo, and that allows McMillan all that motion stuff and getting free on kind of the busted coverage plays that happened early on last year. So I think there's a lot that it would just be great for the overall offensive ecosystem. And I think Godwin, if he gets to the open market, man, there's a lot of teams that are gonna be interested in him. So I think if Tampa Bay's probably got to be trying to sit here before free agency opens, getting Chris Godwin under contract. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Let's move to the next team here, Green Bay Packers. Do they follow Josh Jacobs' advice and get a veteran wide receiver is my question for them. If you all missed this during Super Bowl week, Josh Jacobs made waves when he went on 97.3 the game and said, I think we need a guy that's proven to be a number 1 wide receiver already. And it wasn't the first time that he said that. He said it on like multiple programs throughout Super Bowl week, basically saying he loves the receivers on the roster, but they need a proven number 1. there's not a lot of proven number ones available in the NFL, Dalton, and certainly not in free agency. So I don't know who they could get. I think maybe he's trying to manifest a reunion both for the Packers and himself with Davante Adams. I do think a veteran receiver is probably a need for this team, but what level of veteran receiver comes in here is the pressing question.
That's where I was going to go with Davante Adams. He's even said he's open to it. I think that's the angle here of Josh Jacobs. Interesting guys with Wicks and Melton, young guys. But I can see what he's saying, the no true number one. And Christian Watson obviously suffered another torn ACL. Your thoughts on Jayden Reed? Could he be that guy if deployed differently? Is he a true number one? I would definitely was curious just to throw this back to you. Jayden Reed, if he were used as a one, could he be that?
Well, he can't say he is because we haven't seen it yet. I think he has the ability to be, but he also just might be a great number two. There's no problem. There's no shame in that. And I think that the thread I want to pull on there is the deployment thread that you mentioned, because I don't love how he's mostly just been an 11 personnel player. I think he can play outside. I think we've seen more than enough evidence he can beat man coverage when you watch him play, but seemingly the Packers have disagreed with me on that, and I can justify their ability to look past some of his separation and stuff like that and the way he gets open if they just don't love him as a blocker in the run game, and they just want to get size out there. And this is a team that is they're kind of size hardos, honestly. Even when they took Jayden Reed, who's like a sub 190-pound player at his NFL scouting combine, that was like crazy because they have these big size thresholds. Maybe we're seeing some of that manifest itself in his usage. I think Jayden Reed could be deployed in more of kind of way beyond just the gadgety ways we've seen. I think he's a true receiver. Even if he's not a number one, I do think there's more to get out of his skill set than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And it would be nice if Davante Adams came there, but outside of him, I don't see another major alpha being out there for Green Bay to go get. They have a lot of very solid options there, but it is true, maybe not a true alpha, but I don't really see anyone ready other than Adams.
Yeah, even you're right. If they don't take Adams, now we're down into the Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper zone. There's not like even Cooper Kupp and like some of these guys, Steph Diggs. I don't know, maybe Diggs is like a 1-year rental, something like that. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, somebody to work on the perimeter too, because Reed's great in the slot. But Romeo Doubs is just their best outside receiver. I think Doubs is a good player, and I think he was kind of unfairly piled on at times. And I was really low on him coming out of his rookie year, but he had a nice second season, had a really nice third season. He's a guy that I think you don't want him to be your best perimeter option. And I don't think they're going to give up on Wicks or anything like that, but I think it would be irresponsible to roll into week one with the 3 receiver set of Doubs, Wicks, and Reed. I think they need another body added here, and a veteran at any level, even if it's just one of these like lesser veterans, I think would be good for the room as a whole. But yeah, Adams would be kind of the key there. Okay, let's stick in the NFC North, go to the next team here, Minnesota Vikings. Dalton, I think the big question has to be, is J.J. McCarthy ready to take over as QB1 of this team? Because I do think Sam Darnold is moving on this offseason. That's really not knowable based on offseason moves. I think the other thing that's probably gone under-discussed as we keep talking about the Vikings quarterback situation is what's next at running back? Are they bringing Aaron Jones back, or is this a team that's going to take one of these running backs in the draft? Because that player would obviously kind of be a huge fantasy commodity if they were taken, on day 2 of the draft or something like that.
As for McCarthy, the Vikings have finished top 6 in both passing yards and passing TDs in all 3 seasons under head coach Kevin O'Connell. So he could immediately be a fantasy use. Running back is major question mark here. I mean, who's in the depth chart outside of unrestricted free agent Aaron Jones? Cam Akers. So absolutely, this could go from a situation where we don't know the starter is to a guy who would be drafted in the 3rd round of fantasy leagues if he's a starting back on this Vikings offense. So that's definitely the key question here, is what free agent or rookie lands in Minnesota backfield, especially obviously if Aaron Jones departs.
Cam Akers is also a free agent, so they don't even have the great Cam Akers. I guess it's just Ty Chandler, who they basically decided they don't want to play. We got to trade for Cam Akers again.
Right.
So, I mean, they're definitely a huge candidate to add a running back at some point in the draft if they don't bring back Aaron Jones. But, yeah, man, I mean, this offense, even if they take like a small statistical step back with J.J. McCarthy under center, I still think it would be a huge spot to take some kind of running back. Do you have any like early takes on the prospects, or are you not quite there yet?
No, not really, other than Jeanty. No, I've done some research, but no takes. And then it matters what system and whatnot and where they're drafted and all that. But do you have any favorite sleeper backs?
No. No. Other than Jeanty, yeah. I mean, I see our guy Andy is talking about Cam. What's the guy's name? Skater Boy or whatever. As the I butchered that. I know that's not his last name. The guy from Arizona State.
Colin's helping us out.
Yeah, Colin's helping us out. Cam. Yeah, I know it. I know his name is
I don't know how to pronounce that either.
I don't know. Is it Skatibo? I have no idea. That's my point. I know what it looks like. I just don't know how to say it. And so that's where I'm at from a running back prospect standpoint.
Sorry, I have no help. Sorry.
Sketibo. Anyways, I don't know. Point is, I don't know about these running backs yet. I barely know about the damn wide receivers. I'm just getting started there. But they are certainly a candidate to take one of these guys at some point. I would definitely love to take that player in fantasy if they're good. Okay, next team here, LA Rams. Simple question, is Matthew Stafford back with this team? Dalton, as we sit here on February 18th, do you think Matthew Stafford returns to the LA Rams, or does he get traded to a team like the Giants or the Steelers or something like that?
I would say he stays with the Rams, but there's definitely been more smoke to this. Like, I totally disregarded it a few weeks ago, but now it does seem like a more legit possibility. And obviously that would have just crazy ramifications. If Stafford stays, I'd like to point out Cooper Kupp is leaving, and Puka Nacua has averaged 11.6 targets, 8.6 catches, 109 receiving yards in 5 games without Kupp during his career, and Jordan Whittington would be a sleeper. But yes, this requires Matthew Stafford throwing them the football. So definitely could be a major changes in LA if they lose Kupp and Stafford, but I just don't see McVay letting Stafford leave right now.
Oh yeah, oh my God, I've given a lot of thoughts to this situation, and yeah, I'm like you. When I first heard kind of the whispers of this, like shortly following their playoff loss, my first reaction was, what are we talking about here? What from the Rams perspective? Because if Stafford decides he wants to come back to the NFL, why would the Rams not just say, yes, you're our quarterback? Well, a couple of different things here. The contract. I think the negotiations got a little frosty at one point last season, in the offseason. I think that got a little bit testy, ultimately worked itself out, whatever. He played for them last year. It was fine. They go to the damn divisional round. That's sort of where it's tough here, because I think the Rams are pretty close. They're a young team that's kind of right there on the edge. A couple of moves in the offseason, I could see them being a Super Bowl team next year. On the other side of it, Dalton, do they want to? Stafford has never been a guy to leave any dollar on the table. He's a guy who has made the most of his career earnings, as he should. He doesn't really have any incentive to take a discount right now, because if the Rams don't want him, one of these other teams will be willing to pay him big money just because of quarterback desperation, especially with the way this draft class sets up and things like that. So I think Stafford, if the Rams don't want to pay up, somebody will want to pay up for him. That's the other part of this here. Then kind of continuing on, you mentioned Sean McVay. I think there's probably a part of Sean McVay that, when Matthew Stafford came in here, they sort of changed the offense up to make it more Stafford friendly. And I think McVay enjoyed that. But don't you also get the sense that McVay just might end up being one of these guys who, I don't know, I'm not going to call him totally Gruden-esque, but he does come from the John Gruden tree of just like, eventually he just wears out on these guys and kind of wants to try something else. Maybe he likes the idea of what if we just sign what if we trade Stafford away and we sign Sam Darnold? And I think the Rams would have enough equity in the Sean McVay stuff to say, hey, McVay could pull this off. So it might seem crazy and I did think it seemed crazy at first. Now I'm not saying I totally see the logic, but I can kind of sort of get it from the Rams side of this. And I'll throw this back to you with my final point here. How confident are we in that Matthew Stafford is still a top 5 quarter, like a top 10 quarterback in the league? Because I don't think he played. I think it was his most shaky season since arriving in LA last year. I also think there's a chance that, like, if he gets traded to the Giants, we basically treat them like we did with the Jets 2 years ago, and it goes really poorly. You know, they get the Rodgers-like season out of Matthew Stafford that the Jets got this year. And again, it's more hype than it is results. I think the Rams might be thinking, let's get out of this 1 year early than 1 year too late. So a lot of thoughts there. I don't know. You take that any different direction.
There are good points that Stafford is clearly not the same player he once was. He also was playing through supposedly 4 cracked ribs from week 15 onward last year.
Yeah, but he's always playing through something. He's and I think that's like a point in his favor that he's tough as shit, and I think teams love that, teammates love that. But you know, he's as an older quarterback, if you're building a team, that's something you've at least got to keep your eye on.
Yeah, it seemed like McVay got pretty fed up with Jared Goff's limitations at the end there. Obviously, Goff became a much better player, but are they going to go to Jimmy Garoppolo behind them? This Rams team, Harmon, was down 1 point and had the ball going into the fourth quarter in Philadelphia against that Eagles team in this playoff game. One point. I mean, a fumble by Kyron. I mean, the Eagles team boat raced the Chiefs. The Mahomes had never lost a game indoors in his career. He was undefeated indoors. Eagles boat raced them. This Rams team was on the road and was right there. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't see that. I just would be surprised if they ultimately do move on from Stafford. But absolutely, if you read between the lines here, it seems like there's some issues here. And I think you did hit on it. There was some acrimonious contract talk last year, and Stafford now wants to be treated differently. You know, doesn't want to go through that and wants something to make him happy, and it appears they can't reach that. And even if McVay doesn't want it to happen, he may be forced his hand. So this will be one to watch. Maybe above all is off-season questions is, does Matthew Stafford stay in LA?
Yeah, I would say that the only thing I'd push back on that you said there is that it would be like McVay's hand would be forced. That might be how
you don't think
gets
that's
put. I just don't think that. I think nothing happens in Sean McVay in LA without Sean McVay's approval. So I think it ultimately it would be hey, we don't want to give him this level of guaranteed money because we are concerned about something. And I would I think it's like 50-50 basically if he's back or not. And again, for Stafford, I just don't know why the hell I'd want to finish out my career. Even, you know, I'm never going to tell another human being to leave money on the table. I totally get getting every cent out of this sport that you possibly can before it eventually tosses you out, because that's what happens to every single player, basically. But at the same time, you want to spend the last 2 years of your career piddling around with one of these rebuilding teams, unless it's the Steelers, I just don't really get it. I don't really understand what the move would be from Stafford's perspective as you're trying to cement what could be a Hall of Fame career. Like, he could go down as a Hall of Famer, but I think he probably needs a couple more seasons here. The best way to do it is in LA. And I do think it would be telling if the Rams don't feel that McVay is, or if McVay and the Rams don't feel that Stafford is at that level anymore. That would at least, I would be cautious before saying like, oh yeah, Malik Neighbors to the moon with Matthew Stafford, or the Giants are going to be a playoff contender now that Matthew Stafford is there. Just because, again, we just lived this experience with a different aging quarterback in a New York City. So I don't know, just something to keep our eyes on here. But it's one of the biggest. I think it's probably the first offseason domino to fall is what happens with Stafford. Does he return to LA or does he hit the open market?
I could see Sam Darnold there, although he's been linked to the Raiders. But yeah, I'm with you. It appears about 50-50 for now, and it's absolutely the story of the offseason.
To Matthew Stafford's former team, we go with our next one here, the Detroit Lions. Simple question, not a simple answer. Does the offense take any level of step back with Ben Johnson out the door? Again, we are going to do a full coaching podcast with Nate Tice actually later this week, breaking down all these coordinator changes. So interesting to get Nate's thoughts on, John Morton and kind of the new offensive brain trust there in Detroit. Are you concerned when clicking any Lions players in fantasy, Dalton, that Ben Johnson's no longer calling plays for this team?
I'm concerned, but not enough to lower them appreciably in any of my rankings. I'm all about Gibbs and can't wait to listen to your interview. And St. Brown and is such a high floor. I guess my thing would be this. Here are my big takes. I might take Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors over Amon-Ra St. Brown, if that's like a tiebreaker. Okay, I might go after but I might have done that anyway because you know me, the younger guy upside. But like if that's what we're talking about here. But no, I mean, Goff will probably put up monster numbers at home still, and I trust Campbell getting the right guys to help. But yes, of course, there's concern. This guy is considered maybe the best, brilliant play caller in the league, and now he's gone. So yeah, there should be some concern, and we just won't know until we see it next season.
Yeah, I think Dan Campbell's getting a little underrated in the whole Ben Johnson kind of hype cycle. Not to take anything from Johnson, who was a great hire by the Bears. I'm very excited about that. But I think people forget that Dan Campbell actually took over play calling duties when they initially fired Anthony Lynn before Ben Johnson was promoted as the offensive coordinator. Like, he has a deep offensive background and a lot of really good ideas about offense, does Dan Campbell. So I think the Lions will end up being fine. And John Morton's a guy who has, again, we'll talk about this with Nate. He has some very interesting like drop back concepts dating back to his days as a coordinator for the New York Jets. So I think the Lions will end up being fine. But if you also want to do that, break some ties in favor of some of those younger wide receivers, I don't think I can hate you for that either.
Fair. Cool.
Okay. Next team here. Washington Commanders, they were in the NFC Championship game last season. My question for them, amid many team needs, do we get a premier pass catcher added at some point? Dalton, the Commanders obviously were a great team last year, but they did it on the back of a lot of these kind of short-term rental players. And when you just look at it, they have a ton of free agents, and a lot of them, if they depart, and honestly, even if they retain them, are going to create some critical needs. So I wrote these down as possible critical needs for Washington due to upcoming free agents. Edge pass rusher, Dante Fowler and Cleveland Farrell are both free agents. Safety, Jeremy Chin, who's kind of like a hybrid player, but did play a lot of safety snaps. He is a free agent. Bobby Wagner at linebacker is a free agent. Cornerback, Benjamin St. Juste and Noah Igbenogany, who had a great season as their slot corner, are free agents. They'll retain Marshawn Lattimore, who was kind of up and down, and Mikey Sanders still, who was great as a rookie. But still, those guys could create a need at corner. These are a couple areas I thought that were needs regardless. Guard, their left guard is not good enough, and Sam Cosmi was probably their best offensive lineman and tore his ACL in the playoffs. So they definitely need some help on the offensive line. I think they could add a tackle, and nobody would bat an eye at that. And then pass catcher. De'Ami Brown, Noah Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, Jamison Crowder, and Zach Ertz are all free agents. They do have rookie tight end from last year, Ben Sinnott, waiting in the wings, and Luke McCaffrey at the slot receiver position. But that's basically it right now in terms of the Commanders' pass catcher. So I think pass catcher is a huge area of need for them, Dalton, but they have a lot of other needs as well. So do you think we get a premier pass catcher added at some point to this Washington Commanders team?
Lot of team needs. Who cares if you're a Commanders fan? You're so pumped having Daniels now for the next decade. Just whatever helps him. So offensive line, yes, another pass catcher. Sinnett, I'm excited about. Tight end. McCaffrey might have been, a miss there at round 3, but De'Ami Brown might have been a later hit at round 3. So they clearly need another receiver outside of Scary Terry. Get Daniels protected and just sit back and enjoy the next decade, man. I mean, what a special player, and now you just got to put the pieces around him and whatever, offensive line or wide receiver, or if you must go defense, but let's just load up Daniels as much as possible.
Okay, so this is the team I think could be the Debo team. I teased it earlier in the show.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay, I like it. Yeah,
I've been thinking a lot about this, about where does Debo fit, because he's such a, like you said, he's not even a receiver. I'm laughing at people that are like, yeah, the Packers need a veteran receiver. They should go get Debo Samuel. I mean, have you watched Debo Samuel play football ever? But especially last year, give me a break. He would be exactly what they don't need in terms of an option on the perimeter. But this Washington team does not need that, right? Because they have a pure outside receiver in Terry McLaurin who can line up outside all the time, and you're going to get him some slot reps, stuff like that, but he's a pure perimeter player. Their GM, Adam Peters, spent time, obviously, in the San Francisco front office. That could be like a nice little connection there. And the Commanders have $75 million in cap room. And even if they bring back a bunch of these low-cost veterans to sort of plug these holes, they're still going to have a boatload of cap room. They're the type of team that could say, hey, San Francisco, we'll send you a 7th or a 6th, and you just give us Debo Samuel, who's probably overpaid on his current contract. But who gives a Like you got cap room to burn anyways. And I also think he would fit in this offense. A lot of like the Cliff Kingsbury motion stuff. You could get him some gadget touches, the horizontal raid jokes back from the Arizona Cardinals days. I think he would fit. And really what they need is like a presence over the middle of the field. And if Debo still has great traits as a receiver left, which I'm very mixed on what Debo has left. You can write off last season due to the fact that he had pneumonia, but I also still think he's a declining player overall. But I think he could be useful as a middle of the field presence, which is what this team needs because McLaurin is a pure outside guy.
I like the Peters connection. Forgot about that one. Also, the Niners have just been in dialogue about Ayuk last offseason. So they've been talking to that front office. So now we're just a different receiver. Makes total sense. If they can afford him, the Niners aren't going to ask for more than a seventh. Take him off their hands, that contract. So, wow, that one makes sense. I was curious whom you were going to go with there. And Washington is a very solid fit.
I think that's one of the few that I'd be like, okay, I like it for Debo. What a sliding doors moment the Ayuk trade could have been for the Commanders. I mean, people dogged on Ayuk like, why would you want to go to the Commanders? He was literally literally posting their he was literally posting their practice film on his like social media and stuff like that. Yeah. God, that would be a pretty sick connection. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Brandon Ayuk. That would have been pretty awesome. So that is unfortunate that we didn't see that, but obviously great spot to be in San Francisco if he can get healthy. Regardless, I think this makes sense as a Debo team. But man, there's plenty of players. Like if Chris Godwin got to the open market, they're one of my favorite teams to add him. That's exactly what they need. Cooper Kupp, I think, could be a decent fit on this team as well. But they're one of the teams I actually think could get Debo and maybe maximize him. So I do think we get some like big name pass catcher added here at some point. But just last note, I'm not totally willing to write off Luke McCaffrey, who I think in isolation actually looked capable last year, but he was a pure developmental player. He hasn't played receiver that long, so I think he is like in dynasty discussions and stuff like that. He's going to be completely written off because he didn't do anything as a rookie.
Totally,
but somebody that I'm not bullish on McCaffrey. I actually thought he was a reach, but I'm not totally writing him off just yet.
Good to know. All right, rooting for the McCaffreys. All right.
Final team here in the NFC are Super Bowl winners, Philadelphia Eagles. Again, simple question, maybe complex answer. Dalton, do we care at all that they are once again changing offensive coordinators?
I mean, yes and no. Ideally, we would have kept continuity, and more certainly did help this offense. I mean, you could have seen it in the preseason. It's like, oh, they're running with more pace. They're running with motion. It's different than last year's stagnant offense, and it resulted in a Super Bowl win. But on the other hand, is it mostly Jalen Hurts' offense, and he's had a different coordinator every other year? So is it going to matter? I mean, ultimately, it doesn't move the needle a ton, but it's not ideal. I mean, right? I mean, you would have liked to have seen him stay there, but Hurts, whatever. He just won the Super Bowl and looked awesome. And what are you going to do? I mean, all those 1-yard touchdown runs aren't going to go away either. That would be the biggest concern, is if the rules change and Hurts loses the tush-push touchdowns. That's the biggest concern for fantasy managers off season for the Eagles.
Yes. I think that would obviously be the big thing there, but who the hell knows if that's going to happen. We don't know who the Eagles offensive coordinator is going to be because they haven't announced that yet. Because Kellen Moore is interviewing some guys from this coaching staff, including Doug Nussmeier, who was the quarterback's coach. His son, Garrett Nussmeier, was quarterback for LSU this past year. So something to keep an eye on there, I guess. But that he seems like he's the favorite for the Saints offensive coordinator job. If I had to guess, I think they promote from within, and it's Kevin Patullo who takes over as the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia. He was the passing game coordinator / associate head coach. And I've just read that he was a big part of building the offense there in Philadelphia. So he would be the favorite there. Of course, we've seen this go wrong before, right? An internal promotion with Brian Johnson to take over for Shane Steichen didn't work out. But the fact that there's some decent hype on Patullo and what he did to design that passing offense. That's the big key. Jeff Stoutland is the run game coordinator, the offensive line coach. That run game is going to be fine. I'm not worried about that at all. It's just the pass game and some of the just little tiny tweaks and answers that Kellen Moore gave Jalen Hurts is something that could, be a slight deterrent from a fantasy perspective next year if they don't get this hire correct.
And like you said, it doesn't always work out that way, but I do feel more comfortable if it is internal. You know, a guy already knows her likes and doesn't like, and he was there with more and stuff. I probably would prefer that. But no, ultimately, not too much concern about changing offensive coordinators again, since it seemingly happens every offseason for him. But would have been ideal if they had kept some continuity. But good for Moore. You know, young guy still, and he earned that shot in New Orleans. So congrats to the Eagles. Again, just such an impressive Super Bowl run. And everyone, I mean, just crazy how much they beat up the Chiefs in that Super Bowl.
Extremely fascinated to see how they try to run it back and what their offseason moves are here in the next few months. All right, Dalton, appreciate you joining, buddy. You are grinding out fantasy baseball content for the next month, so it'll be a little bit before you're back on the pod, but I appreciate you doing this one with me. I'm gonna leave you alone, let you do this baseball stuff. You and Scott, I'm gonna try not to bother you guys here for the next month or so as you grind out that unfortunate sport over there.
Yeah, unfortunate sport. I appreciate it. I will be listening to your pods, of course, in the meantime, but I'll be happy to jump back on and start talking some draft stuff for football. But as I said, I'll be listening in the meantime. Always enjoying your work, Harmon, and good stuff over the Super Bowl as well with all those interviews, and looking forward to this Gibbs and Montgomery one.
Yeah, appreciate you, Dalton. We draft is fast approaching, sooner than any of us can possibly grapple with here over the next couple of months. I'm so not ready, and I'm trying to get ready as quick as possible, but we'll get there. It'll be fine. It's better than having a real job, that's for sure. You mentioned those Super Bowl interviews. You mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. After the break, you guys will hear my conversation with the Lions running backs right after this. Absolutely thrilled to be joined now. You know, normally when I intro these, I always say one of the best this, that, and the other in the game. One of this, that, and the other. No. I'm thrilled to be joined by the best running back duo in the NFL, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. What's going on, guys?
I'm chilling.
Cool and just making our runs.
Yeah, you guys, I'm sure, have done a lot of these. You're here on behalf of Bounty. Tell me what you got going on.
Yeah. So me and Jahmyr are obviously partnered with Bounty. You know, when you got a mess, you know who to go to when you need to get it cleaned up. You can't have football without wings.
You can't have wings without Bounty.
Boom. That was silky smooth delivery by both of you guys. So, you are the wingmen here on behalf of Bounty. David, I'm going to throw this one to you guys, to you first. What's the first memory you have of Jahmyr Gibbs' skill set that kind of stood out to you and just made you stop and be like, oh, this guy might be special?
I mean, I always knew. I mean, I watched him a little bit like in college, like on his last year when he came out. But that's honestly not what struck me the most about like, nothing against his skill, but like I wasn't really paying attention to his skill as much as who he was.
Sure.
So when he first got there, I thought he was like a stuck-up kid.
Oh.
Because he came out to practice. He didn't practice with the rookies. He came out and he had on like regular clothes. He didn't have team issue gear and he had jewelry on. I'm like, it's gonna be one of them guys, but he's not that at all. I love this dude.
When did that impression kind of change for you then?
When I actually talked to him and realized how goofy he was, like, you're a real cool kid.
Jahmyr, it's a don't judge the book by the cover type situation.
Yeah, I didn't know, though. I just came – they said go out here, so I was like, okay. So I just went out.
He dancing. Everything on him danced. I'm like, oh, this guy.
I feel you. Well, all right. That's an interesting one. Jahmyr, for you, what's something that you kind of learned from David maybe early on?
I mean, probably the same thing. Not stuck up, but, you know, when you're a rookie and you hear about the league, they talk about, like, how there's not really like no friends in the league and like how everybody's like fighting for a job and stuff. So I didn't know how people were going to be. And then when I started talking to, David and all the backs, everybody was cool and we all got along. We're all goofy. And it's just like, it's like a perfect fit for all of us. So it's really good being in that room. So.
Yeah, it feels like watching you guys, I mean, you kind of seem to build off of each other and like your skill sets complement, but at the same time, I would say that, you want to throw Jahmyr Gibbs on third down, you can do that. You want to throw David Montgomery out there on third down, you can do that. You want to run gap scheme, zone scheme, you guys can do a little bit of everything. How important is that, Jahmyr, to have a guy that can fill in for you at any time, at any moment?
We both complement each other very, very well. And having two people that can do everything, I mean, it's hard for the defense to say when this guy's in, he's going to do this, or when this guy's in, he's going to do that. So having, both of us being able to do everything is really good. So,
is that something that you've had in your career before, or is this more of like a first-time thing, Dave?
Nah, I mean, I've always been around like I was blessed enough to be around. Like I don't know if you remember his name, Tariq Cohen.
Yep.
Tariq Cohen?
Oh yeah, Tariq Cohen.
Tariq can do everything.
He was an electric player.
Yeah. He was a dog. So just being around him. But like kind of when Tariq left, I'm saying, it kind of got to being the same. But when I got here and I was with John, I partnered up. I'm like, yeah, like us together, we'll be unstoppable, and we want to go down as the best running back duo to ever do it. So we still got some hills to climb, but we know we'll be able to do it.
Well, I mean, I think you're well on your way. Like I said, certainly the best right now doing it. That's for sure. I used to do a show with Austin Eckler, and he always used to tell me that he really valued that like second pitch to, as fantasy folks, like we all want to see one running back get the touches, right? Or I'm not putting myself in that bucket, but people do this, right? Like just give this guy all the touches, that guy all the touches. But Jahmyr, this stood out to me after the Week 18 game when obviously David wasn't playing. I think the NBC crew told you like how many touches you had, and you're like, whew, that's a lot. Like, does it really help you in game to kind of have like that stamina when another guy is there?
I mean, I feel like I could hit like, a big number of yards or whatever,
sure.
Any amount of touches for me personally. So I don't really be too worried about, 25 touches, 20 touches. As long as I make the most of my opportunities, then I'm good, and I know that. So
yeah. Efficiency over volume and everything like that, 100%. Yeah. I think one of the stories of the season this year, guys, is these high-end elite running back talents like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, going to new teams and really taking these already great rushing ecosystems and like weaponizing them, taking them to the next level. Obviously, Saquon's here in the Super Bowl. But I feel like you guys actually probably were the ones that started that. Like the Lions had a good run game before you two got there, but then it's certainly gone to the next level, I think, with you two there in Detroit. David, what makes the Detroit ecosystem so good?
We do. I know being under Coach Campbell's everybody else calls him Dan's regime. I think us understanding like what kind of guy he is and the grittiness that he brings to the game. He also understands like handpicking the guys that he decides to bring in the locker room. Mm-hmm. And our character is very high. Like he's not bringing in a culture vultures. Like that's not what we're here for. That's not what he's here to do. And me and Jahmyr kind of being a part of it and seeing it and knowing that we can be there to help as much as we can. I think it makes everything so much easier. And I'm just excited that we're able to be a part of it.
And them boys up front, they get to moving.
Yeah, for sure.
they get to
the
moving.
Best line in the league. No disrespect to nobody else.
No, 100%. It's a great offensive line. And for me, the receiver position is the one that I focus the most on. Yeah. And obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
We got the best in the league there, too.
That's a great group. But one thing that definitely stands out to me is like those guys block their asses off, too. And that's huge to rip off those long runs.
We can't do it without them.
No question. No question.
You mentioned Dan Campbell, David. And one quote that stuck out to me right after you signed the extension this year, Dan Campbell said, "This is a guy I wish I played with." And for me, I don't know, like, I mean, you could tell me how you reacted to it, but that like almost kind of just gave me chills hearing that.
Yeah. I mean, coming from somebody like so remarkable and Dan, I think for me to understand that, of who I am and know what I'm capable of, but also knowing that someone looks at me in high value, it's refreshing to be able to be somewhere when like your head coach like love the version of you and who you are, and he pulling for you to be the best version of yourself. So when I hear stuff like that, it's confirmation for me like I want to play for this guy until I can't play anymore.
Jahmyr, you have any good Dan Campbell memories to share?
I mean, probably like almost like every practice, every walkthrough, we just start bumping each other. Like out of nowhere, it just be random. Like I'll walk by, bump him, and then he'll walk by me, he'll bump me. It's just some funny.
One of the all-time like dudes rock high vibes teams that I remember watching over the last few years. So Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, really appreciate you guys stopping by today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, appreciate you for having us.
All right, that is going to do it for today's show. Thank you to Dalton Del Don, David Montgomery, and Jahmyr Gibbs for joining the show. I mean, many people are saying best running back duo of all time. That's what David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs said they're trying to do. Many people are saying Dalton Del Don, Matt Harmon, the Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery of podcasters, maybe the best podcast duo of all time. I've just heard people saying it. So shout out to all three of those gentlemen for joining the show. On Thursday, what has been promised many times will finally be delivered. The Coaches Show. Nate Tice and I will break down all the most important head coach and offensive coordinator hirings, all the changes that were made this offseason. We're going to break that down on Thursday. Until then, we are out.